Okay, can I go ahead, Alwyn?
Diolch yn fawr.
I'm Councillor Peter Lewis, Chair of the Fire Authority. I welcome everyone to today's authority meeting where we're all attending remotely. All microphones will be muted unless you wish to speak. Please indicate if you wish to speak by using the raised hand function found by clicking the participants icon on your screen. At the appropriate point, I will call out your name and you will need to turn your microphone on. If you have cause to leave the meeting, can you ensure that you have turned your microphone and video off? Can I remind all members to choose their language of choice as translation facilities are available? So welcome members. Apologies, I've received 3 apologies. Councillors Sue Lloyd-Williams, Jason Perry and Gareth Roberts. Are there any other apologies from members? No, I see no raised hands, so we move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations? Again, I see no raised hands. I haven't been advised of any urgent matters. So we'll move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of November 2020. Have we got a member that would agree to it being a true record? Thank you, Jeff. Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Paul. Any matters arising? Chief Officer, have you got any matters arising? I've got Mary Lloyd Davis. Mary?
No, I was only proposing. Dim ond yn cynnig oeddwn ni.
I was just proposing.
Oh, right, okay. Thank you for that. I think we're all in favour. Thank you. Matters arising, anybody? No? Well, I'll move on to the Chair's report. The Deputy Chair, Assistant Chief Fire Officer Richard Fairhead and myself met with Rena Yorworth virtually to explain the RDS operation, how we address shortfall in availability, and specifically issues raised by him relating to Ynys-Môn. The Deputy Chair and myself have held a number of meetings virtually with the Chief Fire Officer since our last meeting, and my emails have kept you informed on some of those discussions. I have attended with the Chief Fire Officer North Wales Regional Leadership Board meeting. The Deputy Chair, Chief Fire Officer, myself and colleagues of Mid and West and South Wales met with the WLGA to review items on the upcoming agenda with the Deputy Minister. The Chief Fire Officer and myself have met with the Deputy Minister for Housing and Local Government, Hannah Blythen, twice. Once with colleagues from Mid and West and South Wales to discuss 1, broadening the role of the firefighter, 2, COVID-19, and 3rd, building safety. In connection with broadening the role of the firefighter, Welsh Government Cabinet gave approval to develop the proposal and they set up a working group formed to develop a timetable. And the Ministers had a meeting with Matt Rack of the FBU on the issue. In terms of building safety, a white paper was being issued on reforms to fire safety in blocks of flats, and she requested the Fire Authority share resource implications resulting from the proposals in due course. The second meeting was a North Wales catch-up with us receiving and updating on the issues raised at our joint meeting back in November. We welcome sight of the white paper on building safety prior to publication, and we would forward our response in due course. We received an update on the 2021-22 budget confirming the allocation of grants was unchanged, which we welcomed. We were able to inform the Minister that despite not running the usual Phoenix programme, an alternative programme virtually had delivered 411 presentations to 1,003 children. In addition, a 15-minute pre-recorded session was sent to 252 teachers for them to present. I think that's really commendable on the fire service using that initiative. The Chief Fire Officer updated the Deputy Minister on the recent flooding incidents and the service response. And as you would expect, the Deputy Chair and myself have had discussions with the Chief Fire Officer on the recruitment process to fill the impending vacancy for Chief Fire Officer. And you'll receive a further update in part 2. So that's my report. If there are any questions for members, I'll readily answer them. No? Can I ask members then if they'll just raise their hand if they accept that report? Thank you all. Now move on to item 7, COVID update. I think Chief Fire Officer is going to take this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. I think the COVID update has to be seen against the background of the increasingly good news about the drop in cases in Wales, and obviously we look forward to the easing of some of the restrictions that we've been working under. But the key points in the COVID update, firstly, you will recall that we have been providing assistance to the Welsh Ambulance Service. We continue to do that, albeit it's on a very limited scale now, and we are expecting in due course for that to be scaled back as the demand on the ambulance service reduces. We've also provided staff to assist in the vaccination effort, and this has been particularly pleasing to see because all of these members of staff, of course, are volunteers, but we have staff currently working as administrators in the vaccination effort. We've also provided specialist support in respect of quality assurance of training, and indeed in human resources support as well. So that's a very positive contribution that the Fire and Rescue Service has been able to make to the vaccination effort, and I'm sure you'd want to take note of that. Sickness absence as a result of COVID still remains comparatively low. Obviously, some of the restrictions mean that certain individuals will have to shield and can't come into the workplace in any event. But we are seeing some evidence now of the so-called long COVID. We've got a few members of staff who've been off now for extended periods of time. And like everybody else, we're not entirely sure precisely what the long-term effects of COVID are going to be on particular individuals, but we are monitoring that situation. Another aspect in respect of the health of staff is that today we start a pilot scheme of lateral flow testing certain groups of staff or staff who work at certain locations. That will be a combination of both testing in the workplace and for those staff who don't normally respond on a daily basis to a workplace, we will be also undertaking trials of home testing as well. We've been working with Welsh Government officials very closely on developing this trial, and we are hoping that it will provide some assistance to us in our ongoing health monitoring of staff. And finally, Chair, on the COVID update, as you might expect, we're very anxious to learn all the lessons that have been, or lessons that we can from the pandemic. we've revised and updated our emergency health event strategy plan. That is actually updated now in real time, and we will receive, internally, we'll receive a major report before the end of this month around the lessons learned from the pandemic as a whole, and that should inform our work going forward. So I guess, Chair, that's my update, but I'm very happy to take any questions that members might have.
Well, in the absence of any immediate question, I think members would very much appreciate the role that fire service personnel have carried out during the pandemic, and again, relief really that a significant number of them remained safe and well. And obviously, you know, you will keep us informed on the long-term effects of long COVID.
Indeed, Chair, yeah.
I see no, oh yes, Colin, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, yes, Chair, if I could just slightly wider context. We are still in response regionally at the moment, but we do plan to shift back into recovery in May or possibly April, which is positive because that's longer term planning, economic recovery, community recovery, service recovery, and so on. And in current negotiations with Welsh Government, we are still confident that all the primary restrictions should have been removed probably by a July deadline. But it's very much a staged approach, but the fact we'll be switching to recovery regionally is a good place to be as we enter the summer period. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure we all welcome that. Mary, you've got a question?
Diolch yn fawr, Mr Cadeirydd.
Thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me? Does everybody hear me? I just want to second what the Chair said and just to thank everyone. I think the report from the Chief Fire Officer is very encouraging, and thank you very much for all your hard work.
Thank you, Mary. I see nobody else wishes to speak. Can you raise your hand if you accept that verbal report, please? Thank you. Right, so now moving to agenda item 8, and I'm going to invite Sean Morris to present the final draft corporate plan. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Chair. Bore da, aelodau.
Good morning, members. This is the final draft of the authority's corporate plan for 2021 until 2024 to be approved. If I can just draw your attention to two things regarding this plan. The first being the title. The current plans of the authority have used to be called Improvement and Wellbeing Plans, and they have been prepared for one financial year only. But to remember that the plans under the Local Government Act 2009 are going to come to an end. It appears that it is a good time to reflect this change in the title of this plan. And so it is going to be a corporate plan rather than an improvement plan. And this is what's in front of you today. And to recognise the fact that the objectives of the authority are long-term objectives, it also makes sense to create a plan that lasts 3 financial years, not just 1. And thinking ahead, just a few months, there will be local elections in May next year, and so there will be a new fire and rescue service after 2022. And so the members of that new authority will attend their first meeting in June 2022. And so they will inherit this plan. And of course, they will decide themselves whether they want to adopt it as it is or whether they want to change it. but at least there will be a plan there for them as they come into the new role within the North Wales Fire and Rescue Authority. So that's the main difference, a corporate plan for 3 years. The second difference is the style and the look of the plan. The reason for this is because it's created as an electronic document on the authority's website, and there will be electronic links to make it easier for people to click from one page to the next and to find information and relative information such as progress reports and so forth. We are hoping to develop more things in this way so that there's better access to information on the plan by creating it electronically. And so that's the second change. The draft is in front of you, I hope. And if we just look at the plan itself, if we'll go through it, on page 3, the forward, of course, this one looks at the pandemic, of course, and it also looks at the objectives and the long-term objectives of the authority, and to continue to protect North Wales, and that hasn't changed at all. And then if we look at page 2, it looks at the effects of COVID-19 on the authority. And this page looks at noting that even during this period, when the pandemic has forced us to work differently, it also has opened our eyes to the possibilities on working differently in the future, even after the pandemic is over. So new ideas that have raised from the pandemic. Pages 6 and 7 then provide information on the relevant legislation and the core values and so forth. And then pages 8 to 12 then give more information on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the way that the Commission has been encouraging public services to use them. And of course, in response to a response from the Commission, Sophie Howe, this authority increased its objectives. And on page 13, there is a diagram that shows how the 7 long-term objectives of this authority feed in to the objectives of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. Then on page 14 is self-explanatory. And then the following pages 15 to 21 explain more about the objectives and how they contribute towards the Wales objectives. And so these pages explain how the authority's objectives are going to improve or can improve the lives of people, and I hope it makes it clear there. Then pages 22 to 28 looks at the way things are going to be changed over the next 3 years, the action plan, what will be discussed, what will be included in improvement reports at the end of each year. And so what the public can expect from the authority as the authority feeds back on those developments. And of course, within the service, we do work with heads of departments to achieve internal objectives. And so they feed into the authority's objectives, and those objectives set by the government for all the whole of Wales. And then on page 29, there's pages information on how to get in touch. And then an attachment that looks at current budgets and the population projections up until 2025. And so the recommendation is that members recommend the draft plan to be published on the website before the end of this month. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. and I think the authors should be congratulated on a well-written document. And in view of the comments that the Wellbeing and Future Generations Commissioner made last year, I would hope that they would be, or she would be, suitably impressed by this document. I think the graphics in it and the style make it very easy to read, and I hope members appreciate it too. So, any questions, members? Well, I always think, Sean, if there are no questions, it must be a very good document. Oh, I've got Roger Parry. Roger?
Thank you, Chair. It was said a moment ago that what will the public expect within the future? Are we able to fulfil those expectations in the first place, Chair?
Sean?
Thank you. I have every confidence that we will. As I said, we have plenty of done the forward planning. We have the plans in place for at a departmental level. Clearly, we can't plan to the nth degree, recognising that times change, but also recognising a new authority next year after the May elections. And therefore there is still flexibility, but I have no doubts. I have nothing to suggest that we will do otherwise than to deliver.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, Roger?
Fine, thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Next speaker is Dylan Rees. Dylan?
Thank you, Chair, and I echo your comments that this is a very impressive and comprehensive document, very well set out, and I like the digital format. I noticed that under the objectives that it's very sort of helpful that we've got the actions in terms of we plan to achieve this by. Will you be adding timescales for some of those actions, which obviously would be time related?
Yes, we would at a departmental level, certainly, because obviously there's a link to budgets and so on, but also in terms of capacity to deliver. So although, as I say, we will retain a certain amount of flexibility, but nevertheless, our departmental planning, I know our corporate planning department and the finance department work closely together to align those annual planning cycles in order to deliver within capacity. And clearly we will be reporting back at the end of every year, so that if there is any slippage for whatever reason, that would be, we wouldn't wait the full 3 years to let the public know that. It would become immediately evident that things were being amended as we move on. I've done this job for too long to even hope that things will automatically, mechanically go as planned in all cases. But nevertheless, the strategy has been set, the direction is clear, and the departmental plans, as far as possible, have been written in order to reflect those.
Excellent, because I see that things like sort of the intention to have a health and well-being survey of the staff. It would be useful to know if that was planned within the next 12 months or 2 years or 3 years. But obviously, it's in the to-do list, and we'll wait to hear on developments. Diolch yn fawr, Sian.
Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you. Paul Shotton?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. And it's certainly good to recognise it's a three-year plan on a corporate format, and to recognise the different ways of working that have come forward through COVID. So I'm pleased to move the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you for that. Ryan Apsley?
Thank you, Chair. Paul has beaten me to it, but I have great pleasure in seconding the well-presented document. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I haven't got any more speakers wishing to speak, so can I take you to the recommendation on page 16.4, which is to approve the draft plan. I have had a proposal by Paul and a seconder by Brian. All in favour? Thank you. We'll now move on, and thank you, Sean and Pippa, for that report. We'll now move on to item 9, safe and well checks, and I think Richard Fairhead's taking this. Richard?
Diolch yn fawr, Mr Cadeirydd. Thank you, Chair. Bore da, aelodau. Good morning, members. This paper was presented to the executive panel in February, and I'm presenting it now for information for the full authority. And the purpose is to advise members of the impact the restrictions of COVID-19 have had on the number of safe and well checks the service has been able to carry out this year, and how it potentially will affect the Fire and Rescue Authority's target for next year. In background to the paper, following the publication of the Chief Officer's Task Group report in 2007, the authority adopted a target of 30,000 safe and well checks to be carried out across North Wales each year. This was based on the fact there's up to 300,000 dwellings, and the strategy was to visit every dwelling within 10 years. This strategy was supported by the Welsh Government, who provided funding for us to purchase fire safety interventions for the most vulnerable people in North Wales, and these included the single point smoke detectors. That funding was reduced in 2015, and the authority reduced the annual target from 30,000 to 20,000. With the introduction of the first lockdown in March 2020, the service reviewed the provision of safe and well checks across North Wales in order to comply with the restrictions, but also to keep staff and communities safe. So we stopped doing face-to-face safe and well checks. We started carrying out safe and well checks over the phone, and some of the staff who were employed to carry out safe and well checks carried out this function. Other staff employed to carry out safe and well checks were redeployed in the service to support the service to carry out its duties in these unprecedented times. If people on the telephone audits were found not to have single point smoke detectors, then the service made arrangements for these either to be delivered or dropped off at these people's dwellings with instructions on how to fit. In August 2020, when the lockdown restrictions eased, the service, with strict risk assessments in place, introduced or reintroduced face-to-face safe and well checks for the most vulnerable in our communities. As of the 31st of January, as it says in the paper, we'd carried out 9,919 checks, 2,229 those in person. At the end of February 2021, we had carried out 10,957 checks, 2,538 of those in person, which meant that there were 8,000 checks carried out by telephone. 33% of these checks were carried out following referrals from our partner agencies, such as social services, some of the other local authority departments. These figures mean that we're not going to be making our 20,000 target this year, and we're unable to predict how the restrictions are going to affect and the impact on the numbers we'll be able to carry out in the financial year 21-22. Members do need to be reassured, however, that we will continue to review these delivery methods while focusing our efforts on delivering safe and well checks to the people at highest risk in North Wales. So members are asked to note the recommendations in the report, which is there is going to be a shortfall in the number of safe and well checks carried out this year, and potentially COVID restrictions will impact our ability to meet the 20,000 target for the year 21-22. And I'm happy.
Thank you, Richard, for that report. I think it is a credit to the service that they enable them to carry out as many checks as they did. And I think the other thing that's highlighted really is how the benefit of partnership working also helped those figures. So I've got a couple of members that have questions on the report. Paul Shotton first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And we all know, whilst recognising the restrictions, we're under COVID, it is a concern on the delivery of safety checks. The issue I would have that on phone calls is that something could easily get missed, whereby if it were in person, the officer is obviously observing more. So my view is that the sooner we can get back to a more fuller service. And my concern as well is for the most vulnerable in our society, and how are we pinpointing these vulnerable people? Thank you, Chair.
Well, I think one figure that came out in the report really, and it really emphasised that hopefully our partners are addressing that to some extent by the fact that, from memory, there was a 5% increase in referrals from our partners. But I'm going to ask Richard if he wants to add, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Clearly, a face-to-face safe and well check is a better way of carrying out the safe and well checks. We can see the person in their own environment, which is why we moved to doing the safe and well checks in person when we identify those people are more vulnerable. The people who are safer in their homes, we go through a checklist, a pre-prescribed checklist, which identifies all the issues which potentially would cause a fire and what actions people should take. So yes, it would be ideal to continue to get to every single house, but in these times, we have to look at keeping our staff safe and keeping the community safe. With regards to the most vulnerable people in our societies, we do have data sharing protocols with our partner agencies and the people who deal with the most vulnerable in the communities in North Wales. So we'll continue to strengthen those data sharing protocols to make sure that when somebody is identified by a partner agency of being vulnerable, then we're able to provide them with the safety advice to keep them safe from fire and from other things in the home. What we're looking at in the safe and well checks, it's not just fire prevention, there'll be falls prevention, and there'll be other aspects as well which we can assist people with, and also refer on to partner agencies who might be able to deal with that in a different way.
Thank you. Nigel Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Interesting report, and I think shows the benefits of the agile working that the authority has obviously brought forward in the previous years. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and I think the officers need congratulating, really, having done so many safe and well checks in the midst of this pandemic. And we look forward now that we see the easing of restrictions, that the number of safe and well checks will increase. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Mary.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, can I thank Richard for that report? Very interesting and very well done. You're doing your best. Can I ask, if you do receive a referral, if the person doesn't just answer the phone, how do you overcome that issue? So if you phone and the person doesn't answer, how do you address the issue?
We'll continue to phone them, and after 3 phone calls, if they don't answer, we will send them a letter informing them that we're going to continue to try and phone them. But the idea will be is we'll speak to people over the phone rather than just communicate by letter.
Thank you.
Roger Parry.
Thank you, Chair. You spoke about vulnerability. I was wondering, is vulnerability increasing? I'm thinking about older people in particular. That's about it, actually.
One of the contributory factors identified in the Chief Fire Officer's task group report in 2007 was that age was a factor in people being more vulnerable from fire in their homes. So as the population does age, then potentially, yes, there is an increase in the number of people we would have to get to, an increase in the number of vulnerable people in North Wales. But with our work with our partners to identify those people who are perhaps starting to become more vulnerable, we hope that we're able to get to those vulnerable people quicker.
Can I ask another question, Chair, please?
Yes, go ahead.
What's the definition of vulnerability as far as older people are concerned?
There's lots of definitions of vulnerability, and each partner agency will identify a different type of vulnerability. The fact is, when people are older in their homes, then potentially they're not as mobile. They potentially have some mobility problems and perhaps some other sensory problems which start to appear the older people get, which then increases their vulnerability in case of fire.
Thank you very much.
Dylan, Rees?
Thank you. Yeah, my question relates to the cost of the smoke detectors. It says in paragraph 9 that since 2015, the capital fund has remained the same, but the unit cost of detectors has increased, so reducing the number that can be purchased. Do we have any idea of what sort of cost increases we're talking about? And also, with Brexit, are there likely to be any further cost increases, or are all the parts sourced within the United Kingdom? Thank you.
The cost of single smoke detectors, like everything else, is going up. The funding we had from Welsh Government was reduced and has been stayed static for the last 15 years. We have £180,000 revenue per year to buy smoke detectors, and we'll be able to continue to buy the 20,000 with that funding. As part of our planning for Brexit, we looked at all the supply chains that we had across the service, one of them being smoke detectors, because we see how and we understand how important it is that we are able to provide those life-saving detectors for the most vulnerable people. So currently there isn't an issue with the provision of smoke detectors and the supply of smoke detectors, but again, it's something which we're continuing to monitor.
Excellent. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got no other speakers. I've had a proposer to note it. Do I have a seconder?
Cynnig.
Thank you. So the recommendation is on page 20. It's a two-part one to note it. So members in agreement? Thank you. We'll now move on to item 10. It's the projected outturn for 2021. And I presume Helen Howard's taking this, is she?
Chair, if I may, certainly Helen, but not Helen Howard, it's Helen McCarthy.
Right. Go ahead, Helen.
Thank you very much. The report in the pack provides members with an update on our financial performance for the current financial year, and also confirms the anticipated outturn position. The report covers both revenue and capital. Members will recall that the revenue budget for this financial year is £35.9 million. I think it's fair to say that both the Chair and colleagues today have outlined some of the challenges that we've faced, especially in relation to COVID, and also we've highlighted some of the ways in which we've adapted to these pressures. Certainly from a financial perspective, this year has been absolutely exceptional. We have experienced significant variances against approved budget headings, reflecting some of the challenges that we faced and also some of the actions that we've taken to address them. Within the revenue expenditure, we've not been able to progress with the recruitment as planned, and that was for staff across the organisation. And this has resulted in a forecast underspend within this budget heading of almost £1.2 million. However, I think it's really important to stress that these posts remain critical to the authority achieving its long-term objectives. Similarly, we've experienced reductions in other areas of spend, including fuel costs and capital financing. In terms of the capital financing, that reflects some of the actions that we've taken in previous years to carefully monitor and manage the capital programme. The underspends that we've experienced this year have been utilised to meet ongoing COVID expenditure, including the extension of fixed-term contracts for those staff whose contracts were due to come to an end, and also some proactive measures that we've taken to adapt our buildings, and that's very much to maximise the health and safety of our workforce. And this also includes ICT costs that were necessary to support our new ways of working. And I think members have commented on the way that we've been able to transform and become quite agile. And part of that was ensuring that we had the ICT network to support it. There's also been some unanticipated pressures in year, and that included a one-off cost in respect of a backdated rates bill, which was almost £250,000. And that related to one of our properties that was refurbished a number of years ago. In terms of the grants, and we've spoken about the grants in respect of the smoke detectors, but we received grants of £2.2 million. They've all been received this year, and that includes funding for pensions and the filing project. It is anticipated at this stage that all of the grants will be fully utilised, and I think the Chair also provided some further insight in respect of some of the initiatives that we've taken, especially around our engagement with the Phoenix project. Some other items of note is during the year that we also progressed with the replacement of the new fire kit, and the revenue outturn position includes the cost associated with this exercise. That relates to almost £800,000 and includes both the new fire kit and the recycling of the existing kit to make it available for our staff undertaking training courses. In overall terms, the full year forecast is an underspend of 0.1 million, and it is proposed that this should be earmarked for future projects in respect of both our transformation in relating to our working arrangements and also to address some of our environmental challenges in the future. Turning to the capital programme, it's fair to say that this is the area where the effect of COVID has been most pronounced. There's certainly been a number of schemes that we weren't able to progress, and that was simply because we couldn't be assured that we could maintain the COVID security of our buildings. In addition to that, there's been some slippage in replacement of the fire appliances and a number of the ICT schemes that were deferred as our teams worked very, very hard to transform our workforce. The capital outturn is 150,000, and notably the schemes that have been deferred will be progressed in the next financial year. In overall terms, the report is asking members to note the outturn position and also recognise that it has been necessary to realign the budget and that we're seeking approval to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Any questions, members? Yes, Ian Dunbar, please.
Morning, Chair. I apologise for coming on a little bit late. We had visitors at the door. It's regarding the grants for the much revered Phoenix and the safety and well checks. Because we haven't been using them, Helen, is there any chance or any, well, I'd say chance, yeah, that these are still maintained? Because if we haven't had the grants to keep them going, it's going to be a disaster. I know we got there is at 148,000 for the Phoenix, at 223 for the safe and well checks. Can I just ask, if will we still obtain these grants, even though we haven't been actually putting the Phoenix programme on? Because, as I say, that is one of the best things we've ever sorted out for the youngsters, and to lose that because of COVID is going to be a bad thing. And I was just hoping, as I say, that the grants will still come through for those things. And if the grants do come, do they get taken into account by WAG? And could they be used for, as I say, we're not doing these details, can they be used to help in any other way of paying off debts or go into earmarked reserves rather than just have them stopped altogether because we're not able to use them in the year 2021 up to 2022? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dunbar. I think there's two aspects to that question. The first one is the grant position for this current financial year.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that when we received the grants, nobody could have foreseen COVID, and our teams have worked very, very closely with colleagues across Wales and also with the Welsh Government. So it has been possible to provide assurance to the Welsh Government that those grants have been fully utilised in the spirit for which they've been given. And I think we've spoken about moving to the online provision of courses. So whilst it's not been possible to provide the Phoenix courses on a face-to-face basis, the team has still been very, very proactive in working to sort of deliver to vulnerable people. I think the second part of that question really is the position for future years. And I think the Chair also mentioned in all of the meetings that we have with the Welsh Government, we continue to sort of outline the benefits that we feel they bring. Part of that is looking at the mental health and well-being. And I think one of the challenges that we all talk about COVID is the future challenges that we will face. As we know, so many children have been out of the school environment. And I think as they go back into school, those mental health challenges will become more evident. So all the more reason really that both our safe and well checks and also our Phoenix work is protected into the longer term. So to provide you with some assurance, certainly for 2021-22, we've secured that funding, and actually we're working proactively internally to make sure that it's used to best effect. But it's absolutely something that we, at every opportunity, we seek to protect and promote.
Okay, I'm going to bring Chief Fire Officer in now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may just add to what Helen's said. Welsh Government at the start of the pandemic, and I don't recall the exact time frame, Ian, but I think it was probably in the spring, were very clear that the grants obviously had already been issued, and they were very clear that they wouldn't seek to claw back any of that grant money as a result of our inability to provide the activities that we'd already agreed. And they made good on that promise. And they've maintained a consistent stance throughout that, you know, they do recognise that the circumstances we've been in are unusual, and that they wouldn't seek to change the fundamental arrangements around the grants as a result of the pandemic and the change in activity. But I suppose the other side of that coin is that the grants are always vulnerable. We've seen, haven't we, and I think Richard referred to it early on, there was one year where there was a fairly arbitrary 50% reduction in some of the grants that came around without much consultation. In fact, I don't think there was any consultation from what I recall. And of course, there are Welsh Government, so Assembly elections coming up later on this year, and there may be a change of focus or a change of emphasis in any new government, which may mean that the grants will be reviewed and they may take a different stance. So I think just to sort of, you know, build on what Helen said, we've been protected very well. To Welsh Government's credit, I think we've been protected very well throughout the pandemic, but the grants are, you know, no more or no less vulnerable than they always have been. That would be my summation of it. Thank you, Chair.
Paul, Ian, rather, you may well have missed my report earlier on, but whilst we weren't holding the Phoenix programme, just for information, 411 presentations were delivered to 1,003 children, and in addition, a 15-minute pre-recorded session was sent to 252 teachers for them to present. So, if you like, our willingness to communicate with young people and try and get the message across still took place regardless of the COVID situation.
That's good to hear, Chair. Can I apologise for not being here to listen to that? Thank you.
Jeff Lowe. You need to unmute, Jeff.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I also take on board the point you made earlier in the meeting about the delivery of services online. But it has to be of concern to all members of this authority and to their own authorities that grants can be withdrawn by any government at any time. But I hope the Welsh Government, and it appears they have, in fairness, do have the wisdom to see the positive side of the Phoenix project. And it would be a shame, Chair, if we lost this. You know, the young people out there, like all age groups, but young people have never lived through difficult times, and these are very challenging times for young people. So I hope we retain those grants that give that service to young people and the communities in general. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, just to make a comment, you'll be well aware that we've always invited the minister who's responsible for fire to attend a Phoenix celebration at the end of the week, and without exception they've always been impressed, as like their civil servants that accompany them. So I think we would perhaps have a lot of allies and certainly a lot of information, given the fact it's been running for 15 years now, to really have a strong case if the grant was in jeopardy going forward.
Yeah, the work done by our cruise chair is really impressive. You can't walk away from that and leave it. Thank you.
Nigel Smith, you've got a question?
Yeah, just on the page 24, number 8, it mentions the savings or the underspend, should I say, of 1.2 million due to the significant number of vacancies with firefighters and business fire safety apprentices. I just wondered whether it's a time whether we can reflect on whether all those vacancies are really needed, as the authority has operated quite well during the pandemic, and maybe could going forward. Just a question, really.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I think it's worth noting that those vacancies largely related to our apprenticeship programme. It was fully anticipated and hoped that during the financial year we would actually be able to bring in between 10 and 20 apprentices, both in relation to firefighting roles and also that wider role in respect of our business fire safety and also our prevention work. It wasn't possible to do that, and simply we couldn't do it because of the COVID restrictions. But I think it's worth noting that those roles are very much around promoting careers in the fire service and also part of our succession planning. So it's very much part of our workforce model, and those roles are very much needed to achieve our future objectives. So I think it's fair to say that it's a fair point, because we always do reflect when we're looking at replacing a post, we always look to ensure that it fully aligns with our longer term objectives. So by way of assurance, it is something that we're cognitive of.
Okay, Mary.
Thank you, Chair. What's drawn my attention, Helen, is you draw our attention to the tax bill, the unpaid, or the bill that we hadn't received for some time. So whose fault was that? Was it local government?
I don't think it's fair to say it's anybody's fault. It related to one of our buildings that had been refurbished. And I think there was a backlog in the valuation office. So actually the tax demand went back about 4 years. Because it's been levied against us, we have to pay it. But actually we're currently working with the valuation office to more fully understand it and also potentially put an appeal in against it. So it is something we need to be aware of, is that when we refurbish buildings, it potentially does change the valuation, and then will have a knock-on effect on the business rates.
Yeah. Diolch yn fawr, Helen.
Thank you very much, Helen. The problem is it means that we can ask for more rent, and that's what they do with houses. If a house, for example, has an extension, well, obviously there's a chance there to raise that tax because it's worth more. I'm not sure whether it's fair, as you've said, really, for a fire authority building, especially for a building where appliances are kept and so forth. So thank you.
Thank you.
Roger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Quick question. As far as Phoenix is concerned, consider keeping Phoenix online.
I'm awfully sorry, I missed the question, Councillor Parry.
I'll say it again. As far as Phoenix is concerned, is there a possibility that we could keep that online as far as kids are concerned?
It's certainly not an area of my responsibility. I think the new and transformed ways of working means that we will look at all options. It's certainly been something that we've been able to do during the pandemic. That was out of necessity. But I think it's also fair to say that one-to-one contact is so vitally important for the groups that we engage with, and also the underlying activities. So certainly the theoretical content you can do online. I think it's the physical content that would be very, very difficult to achieve in that way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I have the recommendation is on page 23. It's two-part. To note the first and the second is the approve the realignment request. Can I have
Move, Chair. Move, Chair.
Second. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. We're now going to move on to item 11, and I think Helen's taking us again for the budget update.
I am indeed, Chair. Thank you very much. This is a relatively short item, and at the Fire Authority meeting in November 2020, members approved the revenue budget for the next financial year. That equated to £31.7 million. Members will recall at that time that there were a number of uncertainties and risks that we asked to be taken into consideration. And since that time, further work has been undertaken to finalise the budget. And clearly, really exceptional times and quite difficult. And it was ensuring that we fully understood sort of all the cost pressures and all the areas of spend. That's included working with our budget holders across the service. This work is now concluded and has confirmed that the overall budget requirement remains the same at £37.1 million, and that was confirmed to the constituent local authorities. However, and for the purpose of this report, is to confirm that there were some changes to the allocation across the specific budget headings. And turning to the report, the main changes relate to the reductions in the capital financing costs, and that relates to both the ongoing low interest rates that we're experiencing and also changes to the capital plan, including changes this financial year. The employee costs have also increased to two purposes. That's provide resilience within our retained budgets and also allow for the appointment of 2 cohorts of apprentices. And as outlined previously, that's to provide long-term sustainability and succession planning for our workforce. And in part, that's necessary because of the pension challenges that we're facing, where members will recall people are moving into the 92 scheme, and effectively that's bringing forward their retirement dates. There's also been a minor reduction has been experienced in relation to the grant funding, and that's now been confirmed as just short of 2.2 million. That's something that we can accommodate this year, and that was largely within the pensions grant. And we talked about that, so I probably won't talk about the risks anymore within this report. The position with regards to pay cost remains uncertain. That's because the UK government in its spending review confirmed that it would not fund any pay awards for 2021-22. However, national pay negotiations have not yet been concluded, and so therefore that remains a key risk for us. Members will recall that the budget planning assumption was a 2% increase, and that for us equates to just below £300,000. At this stage, the budget hasn't been reduced to reflect the government position, but the 2% has been ring-fenced and will be revisited when the final position is confirmed, and we anticipate that being during the financial year as opposed to before it. We will continue to work with the Directors of Finance to ensure that they are fully appraised of our position and also fully cited on the final outturn. In addition to that, the capital budget was approved at £3.1 million, and there's been a minor revision to that, reducing it down to £3 million for the forthcoming year. So this is for information, but it's also to seek approval that on the revised budget headings for the 2021-22 financial year. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no raised hands, so I'm going to go to the recommendations, which are on page 28, to approve the updated capital and revenue budget. Could I have
Move,
a proposal? Thank you. Seconder? Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Now move on to item 12, the capital strategy. Is this one for you, Ken? Can you unmute, Ken?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it would be clearer to members if Graham goes through the detail of the issues related to the capital, can't read the report, capital strategy. So I defer to Graham advising the detail of the report.
Thank you. Any members got any questions for Ken or accept the report? It seems quite clearly laid out there.
Chair, I think Graham may be experiencing some technical difficulties, and I'm happy to provide a broad overview of the report if that would be helpful for members.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. This report sets out our capital strategy for the period 2021-22 through to 2023-2024. It is a report it's quite a detailed document, and it's previously been scrutinised by the Audit Committee. I think it's fair to say that the area of capital expenditure and financing is quite a technical area, but it's also quite a sensitive area given the long-term implications for the authority in terms of that financial sustainability. Members will note that some of those assets might have a useful life of, say, 5 years, but other ones have quite an extended useful life, and certainly in the case of buildings can span well beyond 50 years. So I think it's really important to recognise that the decisions we take today will have that long-term impact. It's fair to say also that there is quite a comprehensive and prescribed governance framework which sets out in a variety of the SIPFA codes that covers not only things like how do we account for assets, but it also covers things like the Prudential Code, which means that we align the borrowing also with the sort of the decision to buy, and also the Treasury Management Code. So it's quite a complex area. So what this document seeks to do is to provide an overview of all of those elements and bring them all together in that sort of comprehensive way that enables members to understand what our capital strategy is. There's a number of strands to that. The first one, importantly, sits to what are our capital expenditure plans, because effectively with that capital expend, we purchase assets, and those assets are used by the authority to deliver the objectives. Now, these are set out in the medium-term financial plan that was approved by members in November 2020. And they then provide that clear link with the objectives and priorities of the authority. Importantly to note that within the service, we have quite detailed internal arrangements to ensure that all of the proposed capital schemes that are considered have been subject to quite strong due diligence, ensuring that are we clear on the need, are we clear on the costs, and are we clear on the future costs as well. So having to identified the capital plans in terms of what we need to spend, the next question that we always face is how are we going to fund it? And again, this report sets out that it's either fund borrowing, which is the normal route, but it can also be funded by a number of sources. Revenue budgets, we can sell existing assets and use some of the expenditure, so the income to fund future expenditure, or indeed there's longer term finance leases or grants as well. Currently, although the cost of borrowing is low, it's important that we recognise those future revenue implications. And those revenue consequences arise from two sources. Firstly, it's the cost of the borrowing, and then secondly, it's the charge to revenue over the life of the asset. So if we use perhaps a fire appliance that might have a 20-year life, it's important that on an annual basis, about 1/20th of the cost of that asset is charged to revenue. It's commonly known as depreciation, but it's subject to technical accounting within the local authority accounts. So members will note from the report that the revenue costs currently in respect of those capital decisions account for about 7.5% of the total revenue spend. So every year before we've done anything else, we have to take about 7.5% out of the budget and make sure it's there to fund the previous decisions. I guess the next step, and it's quite a logical flow, is to consider the affordability and sustainability of those decisions. And that framework is set out in the Prudential Code. And within the report, there's a really good table of summary of all of those indicators. And what that is just a check and balance for members to ensure that, that the position remains manageable. Another key element of the report is the main area of financing comes from borrowing. And therefore, that's really, really important that members are fully appraised of what is our approach. And it's probably the most complex area, given the risks and the technical nature of it. It's not an area that we have internal expertise on, and therefore quite rightly we use external advisors called Arling Close, and that provides us with support. I would draw your attention to page 41, which sets out the balance between our fixed and variable loans and also the maturity profile. I think it is a complex area, and within the report there's a really good section on the governance, and that really sets out that we fully comply with the SIPFA codes. The day-to-day oversight and control sits with the Treasurer, and also importantly the position is monitored throughout the year as it's reported to the Audit Committee. So this document effectively brings together all of those disparate elements into one cohesive strategy. And as I reported earlier, it has been subject to scrutiny by the Audit Committee, and their recommendation was for the authority to approve it.
Thank you, Helen. I think I probably know the answer, but in terms of the sort of additional capital spend in 23-24, what accounts for that sort of 2.8 over the previous year specifically?
I'm not fully aware of the detail, but my understanding is that one of the areas of spend relates to the refurbishment of our smokehouse in Dolgellau. So that very much is, those plans haven't been worked up as yet. So I think the further into the future you get, the more the higher degree of estimation. But it's just recognising that we will at some point have to start re-looking at the smokehouse.
Thank you. Ian Dunbar.
Thanks, Chair. You're right, Helen. This did go through the Audit Committee in January. I know it's a complex report. I think it was a lot hard to understand, but I think you just explained it a lot better than what we did when we first had it put in front of us in January. I've just got one question, Helen, if that's okay, on the capital expenditure plans. I know the assets that we've got over the year are spent on buying assets, property, vehicles, and all that. But I can't understand what the capital expenditure maybe also occurred on assets owned by other bodies. Could you just explain that to me, please?
Yes,
Thanks,
of course. Probably the best example of that would be the joint arrangement that we have with Welsh Ambulance Trust. So effectively, we've made a long-term commitment. They actually own the building, but we utilise it. So it's appropriate that we incur capital expenditure in relation to our use of that building over its lifetime.
Thanks for that, Ella. I knew it had something to do with the ambulance, but I wasn't sure, and I just wanted clearing up for that. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Mary, do you have a question?
Thank you very much, Chair. Page 42, Helen. And the banks, there's a definition, a BBB. Is this the 888 that we used to refer to?
Thank you very much. In my haste, I can't actually find exactly that reference, but yes, the important thing is that when we either take out borrowing or indeed invest surplus cash, because that's another element of this, we don't aim to hold surplus cash, but we do invest it on the very short term, is that we only do so with organisations that are reputable, and we do so on the basis of the advice from Arling Close. So it's making sure that effectively we don't undertake that speculative investment that would therefore put us at risk of losing the funds that we've invested.
Okay.
Diolch, Helen.
Thank you, Helen. The reason I was asking is because the UK banks lost the 888s, I think a year or two ago. Have they regained that status? I'm not sure. I'm
not 100% sure either, but the important aspect is that we work closely with those professional advisors, and we limit the downside risk to the authority. And my gut instinct is I don't think the banks have retained the AAA status, but I can look into that for you if you like.
Diolch yn fawr, Ms. Cadeirydd. Diolch yn fawr, Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can
Thank
I
you,
ask,
Chair. Thank you, Helen.
Roger?
Oh, thank you, Chair. My question is auction operation on the
Your connection's very poor this end. I don't know whether Helen's having a similar problem.
No, I wasn't able to understand that, I'm afraid.
No, does, Chair. Can't hear anything on it.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Can I ask for a proposer and seconder then?
I'll move it, Chair.
Thank you. Second. All in favour? Thank you. Well, now, busy morning for you, Helen. If we move on to item 13, pay policy.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a policy statement that most members will be familiar with because it is produced annually. It sets out the authority's statement and is a requirement of the Localism Act 2011, and there is also a requirement that it's approved before the commencement of the financial year to which it relates. Further guidance on the form and content is provided by the Welsh Government, and I can confirm that this document follows that guidance. It's quite a comprehensive document, but there are a number of areas that I'd like to draw members' attention to. Importantly, all staff have contracts which are aligned to nationally agreed terms and conditions which depend on their role. This includes collective negotiation on pay and other conditions of service. And I would like to draw members' attention to the tables on pages 51 and 52, which confirm the various terms and conditions that each staff group works to. And that also includes their pension arrangements. And members will be aware that we have two pension schemes, one of which relates to the firefighters' pension scheme, and the other scheme relates to the local government pension scheme as well. All roles that are conditioned to the NJC for local government services are subject to the authority's job evaluation scheme. And what this aims to do is objectively assess each role. So where we create a new post, we effectively job evaluate it to ensure that the pay point is fair and consistent across our service. That includes changes to existing posts, so where we ask people to take on additional roles or responsibilities that changes their post, the job is re-evaluated. Or indeed, it's good practice to undertake that at periodic intervals to ensure that the remuneration is fair for the grade for the staff member. Notably, the authority does not operate a performance-related pay scheme for any staff group. And also that the pay policy statement aims to set out the relationship between the lowest paid member of staff and also the highest paid members of staff. Within our service, the lowest members of staff receive remuneration of £19,698, and which I'd like to note is above the national living wage. And the ratio with the highest paid member of staff is 1 to 6.64. That's not always the best ratio to use, and we also define the ratio between the median staff and the CFO, and that is 1 to 4.12. And of note is that is within the limit of 1 to 20, which was indicated by Lord Hutton in his report on fair pay within the public sector. In addition to their normal salary, a number of staff receive additions, and that can relate to a number of items, including the provision of on-call cover. So that recognises that we are a 24-hour, 7 days a week service, and therefore it is necessary to remunerate staff where they have to provide above and beyond. Members will know and note that the salaries of the senior officers are published in the authority's annual accounts, and that very much is about transparency within the public sector. And lastly, the scope of the policy also extends to individuals who provide their services outside of normal contracts of employment. And this is an area where a number of public sector bodies have been criticised for in the past. This is not a mode of engagement that's common to us, and it would only be considered in exceptional circumstances. Where it is considered, all such cases are subject to detailed scrutiny and to ensure full compliance with the HMRC regulations. I'd also like to draw members' attention to the salary scales for each staff group, which are appended to the report, and again, that really promotes that further transparency. So in conclusion, it's a report that members will be familiar with. It follows a standard template and is fully consistent with the guidance that's been issued by the Welsh Government. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Well, I think members will be well aware that it's a statement we have to publish. I have no questioners, so could I have somebody propose and second the recommendation on page 45? Thank you. Seconded. All in favour? Thank you. Now move on to item 14, the financial reserves policy. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. This is another report that actually was considered by the Audit Committee at its meeting in January 2021. And it's basically an item of good governance. So in summary, the holding of reserves allows the authority to achieve its long-term wellbeing objectives, and also reduces the risk that we will find ourselves in a position where it was necessary in any given year to seek additional contributions from the council, largely due to unforeseen events or circumstances. So therefore it effectively allows us to retain that buffer. It's fair to say that the establishment of reserves is recognised as a key element of the financial governance arrangements of the authority. Reserves fall into three main categories. The first one relates to unusable reserves, and these largely arise from the accounting regime and aren't cash backed, and therefore we can't use them to meet expenditure. So examples of those would be the likes of the revaluation reserve on our fixed asset and also the pension valuation reserve. The next area of reserve is the usable earmarked reserves. And this is a means of building up funds known as earmarked reserves to meet known or predicted requirements in the future. So examples that we hold an insurance reserve in the event that the number of claims against us is higher than expected. We also have a reserve to support transformation, and indeed we have a reserve just in case that interest rates fluctuate largely in any given year. They are accounted for separately, but they actually remain part of the general fund reserve. So it's almost like a subset of the general fund reserve. And then the reserve that most members will be aware of is the general fund. And these are amounts set aside by the authority to cushion the impact of unexpected events or emergencies. And a good example of that would be if we experience significant spate conditions that we weren't able to meet within the resources allocated. That would be a legitimate use of the general fund reserve. Important to note that the creation, deletion and assessment of adequacy and transfers in and out is delegated by the authority to the Section 151 officer, and it's important that the Treasurer maintains that oversight and control. And Section 151 is required on an annual basis to assess the adequacy of reserves, and that's part of the budget setting process, taking into account all of our strategic, operational and financial risks that we're facing. So it's about having that understanding about why we've established them and under what circumstances that we would use them. And importantly, from an authority perspective, each year you receive a report on the level of reserves, how they've been used in year, what the proposals are for using them in future years, and that's included as part of the annual accounts process as well as the budget setting process. It's not detailed in the report because actually this report is about our overarching strategy, but to make members aware, as at 31st of March 2020, our general fund reserve was 1.4 million and we had earmarked reserves of 1.8. Interestingly, the non-usable reserves are actually in deficit to 298 million, and that very much is due to the pension fund valuation. So with members' approval, I can confirm that the Audit Committee reviewed this and they were comfortable with the strategy.
Move, Chair, if no questions.
You see. I think we've got a detailed report there on the reserves policy. So could I have a proposer and seconder for it?
I have moved it, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favour? Takes us to the final item, part one. It's the standards report. Is Gareth or Gareth taking this?
Thanks, Chair. If I could ask Gareth to present because he's done the work with the committee. Thank you.
Good morning, members. You'll see the report there. You'll see that it's the 16th such report, Chair. Interesting to note within the Local Government and Elections Wales Act that it is now a statutory duty on standards committees, or it will shortly be a statutory duty on standards committees to produce such an annual report. So they've only taken 16 years to catch up with the benchmark that the Fire Authority set for them, Chair. The committee has reviewed its practice over the last 12 months, taking a very much more strategic view about its functions. It has looked at how its meetings compare to meetings in other fire authorities, has adopted some practices from them in order to ensure that we have at least a consistent level of reporting to the committee, whilst maintaining some of the reports that it regularly received, such as the rolling review of protocols and codes within the Constitution, so that we are doing at least the same as everybody else and actually slightly more. Interesting to note, though, Chair, in respect of the rolling review of codes and protocols within the Constitution, the committee's actually done all of those for this term. So there won't be any more reports on those now until the new members' term from June next year, when the process starts again. As the name implies, it's a rolling review. The committee has also looked outside of fire authorities at potential sources of good practice to see whether it could identify any learning. So, for example, there was recently a report by the Committee on Standards in Public Life about ethical conduct in England. Now, the Committee on Standards in Public Life used to be called the Nolan Committee, because it was he was the first chair, Lord Nolan, and it was established back in the 1990s. They did a report on England, but we've looked at that to see whether there are any lessons that we can nevertheless learn, given such an august body has considered the ethical regime, and picked up a few recommendations which the Fire Authority has addressed. Lastly, the committee has addressed attendance. It is, for those members that do attend regularly, poor attendance is a source of some annoyance, I'm aware, and also it represents a real problem for the authority. When you have so few meetings, failing to attend meetings leaves a gap, not only within the capacity of the authority, but also a gap in members' knowledge that then takes time to address. And over the last 12 months, I'm pleased to say we've been able to address that, and members have improved their attendance. So thank you to all members of the authority for bringing up their attendance levels. Other than that, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions, but that was all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Gareth. I'm pleased to see that no members have fallen foul of the Standards Committee during the year. No more than I would expect. I've got no questions, so I'm going straight to the recommendation to note the report being proposed. Seconded, somebody? Yes, thank you. All in favour? Well, before we actually move, I asked somebody to propose that we go into part 2. Can I thank all the officers for their presentations and the reports that have been written, that as always are really easy to read and follow. So thank you very much. So yep. Could I ask if somebody would move that we...
Propose we move into part 2, Chair.
Thank you. Seconder?
Second.
Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. So if I could respectfully ask those officers and staff to leave the meeting, please.